Triggers are one of the staples of most character animator puppets that we see. At its basic level, when you press a button, you will show or hide or play or stop playing certain sequences, animations, or artwork at any time. So for example, this guy, this drumming robot here, Drumbot, if I want him to hit certain things over here, I would have the stick one way. But if I made him swap his arm to this side, well, now this looks a little weird. So if I press the X key, I have a trigger setting up. And this is just two Photoshop layers where I'm just saying show or hide a certain artwork when I press a certain button. Well, in this latest release of Character Animator, we have also now added audio to that mix. So when you press a trigger, whether it's showing or playing a sequence or not, you can have audio play at the same time, which makes something like a drumming robot a lot more exciting, because now when I press the 1 key, I'm also playing the kick drum. It's playing this little burst, cycle layers, but it's also doing a kick drum. Then when I press 5, it's doing the snare. Now it's doing a few things when I press 5. Notice it's doing a little burst, it's making the arm play a replay, and it's playing the audio at the same time. Same thing with all the different instrument parts, the hi-hat, the ride, the crash, the woodblock, the triangle, and the cowbell, of course. So now that makes it possible to have a drumming robot. Or do a big drum solo. And just press everything at the same time and go nuts. So that's what we're talking about today, audio triggers. We're gonna start with a much simpler puppet and learn all the different ways. There are actually multiple ways you can add audio. Drag it into your triggers panel, combine it in the timeline, add it to replays, a few different things like that. And we'll learn all the ins and outs and different techniques to do this and why you would use one or the other. And then we'll end up with taking a closer look at this Drumbot character and how he was put together. This is a free downloadable puppet, by the way. Anyone can download this on the Adobe website, and he's free for you to learn from, take apart, use however you want. Hopefully he's a good example. Before we get started, I wanted to point out a very helpful new resource, the CH Resources page. This has a bunch of things that might help you in your creations, whether it's blank templates, a background pack, mouths, but the most pertinent thing for this tutorial is a audio pack. This has around 50 sounds of voices, whoosh sounds, background noise, ambient sounds, all of that stuff that you are free to use however you want in your own creations. So I would definitely recommend downloading this to give yourself sort of a sample sound effects bank that you can use with audio triggers. All right, so back in Character Animator, I'm here at the home screen. You can get here always by clicking on the home icon in the upper left corner. And we have a new redesigned version of Chloe, who's a simple human character that'll be easy, a great starting point to add audio triggers to. So I'm just gonna click on her, and that's gonna add her to a new scene. All right, so now we can talk about adding audio, and you would import it just like any other artwork in Character Animator. You can just double click in the blank space over here in your project panel, or you can go to File, Import. All right, so I'm looking at that Character Animator audio resource pack. You can, of course, download audio from tons of different places online, whether that's YouTube or sound effects libraries or other places. For the purposes of this, I'm just gonna pick a sound. Let's just use this toy honk sound. Sounds like that. That sounds good. Import, and it's going to show up now over here in my project panel. All right, so let's say I wanted to add this to Chloe. So when I press the H button, for example, a horn sound happens. Nothing else happens with her in the animation, just when I press H, this sound is going to play. So there's two ways I could do this. Number one, I could just drag this audio file into the puppet that I want it to affect. So in this case, cartoon honk, I would click that, drag it into Chloe Photoshop, and now you'll notice it's going to show up as a trigger down here inside Chloe. And so I could just set that to H. And if I now press H, it's going to play the horn sound. So if I look at my trigger here, I see that under layers and replays, it says cartoon toy honk electronico 2.wave is showing up. And where is that? That is over here in my replays panel. So remember, in the past, we've talked about replays a lot. These are little animations you can play. So all of Chloe's different poses show up here as replays. And so when you think of a replay as just kind of a performance over time, it makes sense that audio would appear that is a performance over time. So we see down here, there's this audio only replay that's showing up that says Cartoon Toy Honk, and it has a little audio symbol that designates it as a an audio file. When I play this, I can see this little blue line showing me kind of where things are playing and how it's working. Now you get a few different options when you have an audio trigger as opposed to normal replays like these. These only kind of give you the stop, sustain, let replay finish that we've talked about before. But here with audio triggers, audio replays, I should say, you have a few different things. So first is when trigger ends. By default, this is set to let audio finish. So now when I press H, it's going to play through that whole sequence. It's not going to stop. Unlike when I go to stop audio, now this is only going to go along as the trigger is held down. So I'm going to hold down H for a shorter amount of time. And you see it kind of cuts off when I let go of the trigger. So depending on your audio, the length of it, if you have multiple things playing, you may want to do that. For now though, this sound, I'm going to do let audio finish. Offset down here is going to allow you to change kind of when that sound is starting. So I noticed with this horn sound, it's starting a little bit late. When I press H, see the blue line is starting for just a little bit and then you start to hear the sound. Well, I might want, depending on your audio file, you can always bring things into Audition or other audio programs to allow you to kind of shorten or lengthen a certain sound. But sometimes you just want to be able to do that within Character Animator. And so let's say I want this to be, negative 0.2 seconds offset. That means it's going to start a little bit earlier because it's going to cut off 0.2 seconds and kind of offset things a little bit. So let's try it now. All right, so that sounds a little bit more immediate. And I can make this even, if I do negative 0.5, for example, listen to this. It's cutting off the first part of it and is only playing, it's basically starting half a second from the original starting of the file. So when you want to pinpoint things, you can kind of play around with this offset and get the timing just right. In audio, timing is very important. So, a decimal point a second might be all it takes to have something line up as you want. And then finally, we have a volume control down here. And so this isn't really making things louder. It's really about making things softer if they need to be. So if I feel like this horn is a little too loud, I might make this -3 decibels. And now when I play it, it's a little bit quieter and a little bit nicer. So a lot of times when you have multiple sound effects, and particularly when you're taking these from different sources, it's very unlikely that they're going to have all be the perfect volume level. So you might have to do some fine tuning, bring things down so they feel like they're all one coherent system. Now, another way to add audio into your character is just to drag it into the replays panel over here, or drag it into your triggers panel down here. But notice I didn't select the audio file first and then drag it. I kind of just clicked and dragged it in one fell swoop. And that's what you have to do if you want to do these techniques, because if I select my audio file here and then try to drag it, well, now I'm seeing the properties of the audio file and the triggers, the non-existent triggers of the audio file, and not the puppet itself. Because the way that properties work and all this stuff is it's sensitive. It's based on whatever you have selected over here in the project panel. So what you want to do is make sure your character is selected, your puppet is selected, the little one with the pawn icon over here. And then I need to just click and drag, and without selecting, just in one big, fell swoop, one motion, drag it into one of these areas, and that would be how you do it. Or of course, you could do it the way I just showed you, which was drag it directly into the puppet itself. That's probably the easiest way to go about it. All right, so what happens when you want to add audio to an existing trigger that you already have? For example, when I press the B key, Chloe closes her eyes and blinks. And I want to add like a little boink sound when she blinks, let's say. So I found this little blink audio file online. Let's select that. And it sounds something like that. Okay, that sounds all right. So let's add it into my puppet by, again, dragging it into the puppet here. And now I've got blink.mp3 showing up. All right, so to combine the two triggers, I do like I normally would do. I'm going to drag this blink, scroll up all the way to the top, over top of the existing blink, and let go. And that's going to combine the triggers. So I can see now under layers and replays, I've got right blink, left blink, and the blink.mp3 all showing up at the same time. And now when I press B, she's going to do the blink sound at the same time. Of course, if I went over here and had this selected, I could change the offset, I could change audio finish, the volume, all of that stuff that I just showed as well. Another way to do this would be to take the replay, and I can drag this replay now over top of whatever I want. So if I want a hand flip to also have that sound, I could do that. I don't have to keep re-importing it or dragging it down. I can just take my existing replay that I've already timed and got the volume right and drag this into as many different triggers as I want. So I could do something where every time Chloe changes her arm positions, there's a whoosh sound playing, right? So I found this whoosh sound. Let's click this. It makes this transition sound. I use this a lot for videos sliding in and out of tutorials. You've probably heard it before multiple times, probably even in this video. And so what I could do is just drag this into Chloe's replays. That looks good. And then over here in her different arm poses, I could just drag this into each of those arm poses. So the hips, the wave, and so on. All right, so I've added them all. Now let's go to her controls panel. By clicking controls over here, I'll see all her different poses. And now when I click through these, they're all going to play that transition sound. So you can see how, adding this audio to little replays, I can make that a really quiet, subtle sound, or I can make it as loud or prominent as I want, or I could do a lot louder sound that's timed with the waving animation. So when she waves, it's going to move back and forth, whoosh, 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 something like that. So you have a lot of different options here. The last way you can do this is by adding the audio directly into the timeline and then selecting everything and bundling it together as you would with any other replay. So as an example here, I've recorded a little performance where Chloe puts both of her fingers up and kind of widens her eyes a little bit, this really short pose animation. So if I wanted the whoosh to happen when she does both of those, I can just drag my whoosh.wave into the timeline and then drag it exactly where I want, let's say right about there when the arms are starting to go up. That looks good. I might even trim a little bit here at the end to have it stop a little earlier. So this just gives you the precision of, exactly lining up where you want these things to happen. So if you want that audio to line up at a very particular part of your animation, it's probably best to do it here in the timeline. So once I've got that, I can just select everything here in my timeline. Let's right click and go to create replay and trigger. And so that's going to package everything into this replay over here. And I can see I have 2 draggers, the 2 arms moving, my 3 triggers, which is the 2 hand positions and the eyes opening up, and my whoosh wave sound. And that is why it has the audio file. So yes, you can combine multiple elements together into a replay. It doesn't just have to be the audio or just the performance. It can be both of them combined. Now for this particular one, there's a few things I want to do to make this pose actually work. I'm probably going to select this, and instead of let finish, I'm going to change this to stop. And then over here, I'm going to set this to the L key, and let's make that latch. That's just what I would do for a pose. So now when I press the L key, she's going to put her arms up and keep them up until I press it again, and then they're going to go back to the rest position. And of course, I could drag this into my already existing poses swap set. Let's call this something like double point. And now it's going to be part of the whole system. So when I press these other poses, the L is going to fit right in with all of those. Now, the same is true if you wanted your character talking or saying a specific phrase when you press a button. So when I just recorded her saying hello, something like that. And so if I select all of this stuff and right click it and go to create replay and trigger, that's going to do the lip sync plus the audio. And now I have an on-demand phrase where the lip sync is going to match up with what's being spoken. So let's try this. This was added over here. Let's change this to the J key. And so now when I press that, she is going to play that audio file plus the lip sync all at the right time. So you can imagine making a celebrity character, get to the chopper or something like that, Schwarzenegger style, and have a bunch of these with the lip sync all set up, and you've got a character with all their catchphrases ready to go. All right, so now that we've covered the basics of triggerable audio with a simple puppet like Chloe, let's take that to a more complicated character like this drumming robot. So the way that I set this up was I used the timeline as a bit of a scratch pad. So when you're organizing a bunch of poses, I like to add little markers at the top here that kind of say what each recording is, and then leave a little buffer room for your next recording. And you kind of organize your timeline as this little collection of short animated sequences. To add a marker, it's really easy. You just go to where you want and then go to timeline, add marker, and that's going to add it there. If I press enter, I can rename this to whatever I want. And then I can also move this to a different position. So if something's going to be 2 seconds long, maybe I want to move this a little bit later, something like that. And I can just press delete to get rid of it. And so that's all I did. I made these short animated chunks. So here's the snare, and that's just moving the arm down just to drag her. A hi-hat. Now this has a little bit more going on because this is also at the same time of moving the arm, it's also moving the cymbals in and out. And all I did there was just keyframe 2 transform properties. So I added the transform behavior to the top part of the cymbal and the bottom part of the cymbal. And then you can see I keyframe them so they move in here and then back out at the end there. So don't have to do that, obviously, but that was just a little extra thing that I did to several things, like the triangle wiggling a little bit, the cowbell wiggling, rotating a little bit. So it's all up to you. Now, for some of these, like when he goes over to this side, the bottom cymbal down here, I also added the stick flipping to the other direction, because if he kept his arm and then he rotates it over, it's not going to look right. So I had to also make the drumstick flipping over at the same time. And that's why I included this trigger as well. Now you notice the timeline is actually missing a few things. I did include the audio down here, and I didn't include the cycle layers burst that happen. I actually added those individually into the triggers themselves. So once I had a system set up where I've got my right arm, that's a swap set that has all these different things that the right arm can hit. And then my left arm with all these different things. I imported a bunch of files. So I found these samples of the cowbell, the crash, all of that stuff. And I could just drag these into the existing system down here. So now I know my hi-hat is going to play this, my crash is going to play this. So I kind of set up the basic framework and made sure the arm motions all looked okay, and then added the audio in, and then added the cycle layers. So you can see here in rig mode, all of these different burst hit animations that are happening. So I actually made this a separate group called hits. And then inside each of these is the hit animation. So I think on 0, there's actually nothing. On 1, there's a little burst starting. On 2, it looks like that. And then on 3, it's out like that. And then to this, I added the cycle layers behavior, which is just going to play through this sequence and make that little burst animation play. So the same principle as adding the audio triggers applies, right? I have this burst. I want it to also happen when the snare is hit. So I drag this into my existing snare trigger, and now that is part of the system as well. And I can see down here in my layers and replays, I have my snare group as being hit. I see I have my snare MP3 sound effect that's going to play, and then my snare replay as well. So all 3 of these things are going to happen at the same time. Now, yeah, I could have also done this by dragging the audio into the timeline and dragging those, recording a performance with the cycle layers trigger, pressing the button at the right time and doing all that. But for these drum hits, I wanted them all to really happen instantaneously. And so I just timed everything so they happen right at the beginning when I hit the trigger. And that seemed to work out pretty well. But your timing may vary, depending on what you're trying to do. Maybe it isn't as time sensitive, or maybe it is. You may want to fool around with some of the different techniques we showed, depending on what type of audio effect you're going for. So the nice thing about this system is it doesn't matter where I start with the drumstick. So I could drag them, up here. Maybe he's kind of got a more raised approach. And then as I start playing, he's going to move from that position into those different places. Or even if I wanted him over here, and let's flip that around so they're kind of on both sides, something like that. Same sort of thing. By the way, when I press these things, you can see the replays panel is going nuts with all the different, things it's playing back. That's kind of fun to look at in its own right, but that's what's going on behind the scenes. Now remember that character animator triggers can be hooked up to a MIDI device as well. So if I go into layout mode here and selected this and I had a MIDI device hooked up, as soon as I click a key, it's going to bind to that particular trigger. And same thing with my snare. If I want another key, I press that, it's going to bind to that. So this allows you to hook up a character animator to any sort of MIDI device, a pad or keyboard or something like that. Or as Jim on our team did, he hooked it up to his MIDI drum set and started playing drums and having the robot drum along with him at the same time. So there's a lot of really interesting possibilities you can do with this, mixing the world of audio and triggers and animation. And I think I'm only scratching the surface here, and I'm really excited to see what you all create now that this power is in your hands as well. All right, so that's it. A quick look at Triggerable audio. We would love to see what you are making with this. So please use hashtag character animator when you're sharing this on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you're sharing your videos. We would love to see what you're creating with them. And if you're running into any trouble with audio triggers or have some additional questions, the best place to get help is from the official character animator forums. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching and have fun. That was dumb.